All right. Today's topic is God's first 10 pointers. This is not the 10 commandments. See, it's good to remember that each of us have a special gift and a special talent that sets us apart. And this ability typically will shine when we help somebody else with the right words or the right action. I mean, what else are we here for? And it's equally important to remember exactly where our power and sufficiency come from. And Genesis chapter 1 lays out the first 10 pointers to power-packed living. And we'll get into that, and I think you'll enjoy it. These 10 things were the first points of truth any human ever heard or taught or lived by. And everything we teach from the Old or New Testament is in some point or another an offshoot of these 10 sayings that I'm about to talk about. So these 10 things will keep us safe when all hell is breaking loose around us. And so who packed your parachute? And there was a fighter pilot named Charles Plumb of the U.S. Navy, and he had done 75 combat missions in Vietnam. And his F-4 Phantom was destroyed by a surface-to-air missile one day, and he had to eject and parachute into enemy hands. And he spent 6 years in a communist Vietnamese prison. And many years later, Plum and his wife were sitting in a restaurant, and another man came up to his table. And he said, "You're Plum. You flew jet fighters in Vietnam from the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. You were shot down." And Plum asked, "How in the world did you know that?" And the man said, "I packed your parachute." And Plum, he gasped in surprise and gratitude. And the man grabbed his hand and pumped it, and he said, "I guess it worked." And Plum assured him, "It sure did. If your chute hadn't worked, I wouldn't be here today." See, Plum couldn't sleep that night thinking about that man. And he says, "I kept wondering what he might have looked like in a Navy uniform, a white hat, a little bib in the back, bell-bottom trousers. And I wondered how many times I might have seen him and not even said, 'Good morning, how are you?' or anything, because you see, I was a fighter pilot and he was just a sailor." See, Plum thought of that man painstakingly preparing and packing each chute, knowing that he held in his hands the fate of a person he didn't even know. That man saved Charles Plum just because he did the job that he was trained to do. See, Plum said that during his incarceration, that he needed a variety of parachutes. And he said when he was a prisoner of war, he needed mental and physical and emotional and especially spiritual parachutes. And the point of this teaching is to remember who packed your parachute. Who's got your back? And of course the answer is going to be God. So the 10 sayings, the 10 pointers, and the simple basics of truth that were once the foundation of every religion, words that percolated into every creed, are laid out in these first few words that God ever spoke to mankind. And the foundation of all truth is stated in the book of Genesis. And we're going to notice that one basic theme and the benefits associated with it are the first 10 things spoken will be the foundation for all true humanity. These 10 things can be seen in every miracle and in every altruistic action, every good action. So if you want to turn to Genesis 1, that's basically where we're going to be. And this first verse is not one of the 10, but this sets the tone for the 10. And Genesis 1:1, Most of us know this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Simple. But actually, it's forgotten by most of humanity. And this phrase sets a tone for the 10 following statements. This first verse tells us that God alone is the one who got these things started. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is I've been on this quest to understand how the 10 plagues of Egypt, why those 10 things happened, and how did God deliver the people because of them? And what was their purpose? Because every one of those 10 plagues, in some way, shape, or form, is attached to one of the Egyptian gods or goddesses. And we may get more into that next week if I'm still feeling it. But then I came across these 10 statements, thinking I had another original thought, of which I didn't when I Googled it. But it's okay. It was original to me at that time, and it doesn't matter. But this stuff flat out blew my mind. And I realized that if we understand these 10 sayings, these 10 pointers, these 10 topics that are right in the first chapter of Genesis, then it'll help us understand every other aspect of the Word of God and every aspect of our life. It's that big. It has to be if it's the very first thing that was said that God ever said. It has to be huge. You know, God knew that man would have a God complex, and he taught them how to avoid this common trap. Anybody who thinks they don't need anybody or they don't need anything has a God complex. It's sort of the same thing that Adam and Eve fell into. They were in total unity with God. There was nothing in between their relationship with God. But then there came a point where they got talked out of it. They thought, well, we'll read a verse in a few minutes, where they thought that they too could become gods. And all that means is you become your own sufficiency. You know, one God is always the theme. One God is the theme of the whole Bible, which means love is the theme of the whole Bible. Light is a thing of the whole Bible, the theme and the thing. So Adam and Eve were tempted to think that they could become like gods. Like Genesis 3:5 says, you don't need to turn there. Just stay in 1. I'm going to hit other verses. For God doth know that in the day you eat thereof, your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. You can become the caretakers over good and evil. The tempter says, you have the power. You're gods. You're gods. Now we think that's ridiculous. Who thinks that way? Actually, most of humanity does. If you don't need anybody else, then you've made yourself your own God. Not a really good place to be, we'll get to. But there's a way to get out of it too. See, the moment they bought into rejecting God and believing in self-sufficiency is a moment they fell without a parachute. Now, some people, they do okay jumping without a parachute. My brother, he was in the Army, and he said he was over a bunch of men, and they were doing practice jumps, and one guy came down 500 feet with just a streamer and lived to tell about it. Now, it's unusual that he did. I mean, I've done a little parachuting myself, but I never had a chute not open, And so you could live without a parachute, but it would be very unlikely. And so society hasn't fallen far from that tree that Adam and Eve hovered around. And when they thought they could be their own sufficiency, they could be gods. And the root of this egocentric belief system is deeply rooted in everything we buy, all advertising, things that we say, we do, we listen to, we watch, it's all in there. Even the term self-help smacks of this philosophy. Now, I love reading self-help books, but I have to remember that our help comes from God. There's a lot of Christians who think all the power is in them and that they don't need God. Just listen when some Christians talk. It's mind-boggling at times. And so they think that they're the ones who have the healing. But it's always God. All healing comes from God. All deliverance comes from God. I don't care who gets it in the world. It all comes from God. That's how he set this whole earth up, which we're going to see in a minute. Sure, we have to help ourselves. And we have to read things and do things to help our own minds, to keep our sanity. But the key here is God's original 10 statements is to always remember who got this thing started. God, in the beginning, created the heavens and the earth. That's the foundation of everything. And once we get away from that, then we're going to begin to acclimatize to the world and begin to think we are our own sufficiency. When I was a young forestry student, I was stalking through the piney woods of East Texas, collecting leaf specimens for my Dendrology 101 project. And we had to collect 110 leaf specimens. And we had to learn their Latin and common names and be able to identify on site which tree they were once attached to. And I saw this beautiful tree that was about 30 feet tall, and it was in full leaf, beginning to turn red. And I thought, something's wrong. These red leaves don't look right for the bark and the branches that they were attached to. And I noticed that this tree had each leaf had 3 leaflets on it. Now, I also know that box elder has 3 leaflets, and there was box elders there, and so it didn't make sense. And when I looked at when I looked at this thing closely, I realized something is amiss. So I walked around the tree, looking, just trying to figure this thing out, because I had plucked one of these off, and I was going to put it in my book. And then I saw this great big, fat, hairy vine growing up the backside of that tree. Now, I just found one online. I did not take this at that time, but you see that big vine that's growing up the back. That's about how it looked. And this big vine grew up, and then it had tentacles. It grew out into every aspect, every branch, every limb, every tree, every part of that tree. And then it flourished. Then these nice 3 leaflets grew out. What that thing was poison ivy. It was poison ivy. Had taken over, had strangled that tree, and then used it. That poison ivy used that tree to take advantage of its spot in the light. And trust me, there's people who want to take advantage of you and take your spot in the light. And never allow anything to take our place in the light. Allow nothing to shade us out, choke us out. And we have to be aware. And these 10 things that we're getting into are going to help us. These 10 pointers will help us stay in the light and avoid parasites. And this is the very first thing a human needs to understand if he's ever going to live up to his or her calling. Or if they're going to spread out in the light, so to speak. So God's top 10 pointers. Now we're going to look at these first 10 phrases that God ever spoke. And they got to be important. And you'll see it. You've read it, and you felt this, what I'm about to teach before, but you never saw the package. Maybe you did, but maybe you didn't. See, we're going to see how all problems stem from a failure of understanding these 10 principles. And you may have read it 1,000 times. And but then after a while, we don't see it anymore because we get so accustomed to it. And, you know, there was a time where you felt it and understood this. Even if you didn't read it from here, this spreads all through the truth, all through the Bible, this stuff. See, but one thing I want you to remember is you are each and all children of light. So, if we can apply these 10 things, it's going to point us in the right direction to health, prosperity, and the ability to help somebody else. So now, number 1, and we're going to be in Genesis 1:3, and the first one is simply, God is light. And God said there was, let there be light, and there was light. Now, this form of light is beyond the spectrum of physical light. This is spiritual. God's not a light bulb in the sky. And he's not the sun or the moon or the stars. You see? And so I ask you, what is light? What is light really? Because in the end, we'll get to a verse in a minute, in Revelation, one of the last things it says in the last chapter is there will be no more sun, that our light will come from another source. What is light? Right. What is God? We'll wax philosophic here. So we need to understand this first point, or the rest of them will be insignificant. And I'm going to read a few verses. In light, I have to talk about more than the other ones, because it is without that understanding, we can't go any further. So 1 John 1:5 says, this is the message which we have heard of him and declare unto you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. Now, do some Christians think that, or any religion, do they think that God punishes people for doing bad? Yeah. So if God is light and has no darkness, can God punish? No. No. It's hard not to think that, because the whole world tries to break down this first point, that God punishes, that he is a God of vengeance and anger, and he hates different people who don't have the right Christian haircut, or whatever. You fill in the stupid blank. So and over the next few weeks, I'm going to try to show you how the plagues of Egypt could not have been caused by God. In every movie you see about the 10 Commandments, they're going to say that God did this. Well, it may be worded like that, but knowing who God is and what he is, it's just a translation error. And it's because that's the doctrine that every single translator would have thought about: a heaven, a hell, a God that hates evil and loves good. You see, it's different. It says in the Bible that God lets the rain fall on the just and the unjust, and the sun on the just and the unjust. He doesn't care if you're good or bad. He's not like Santa. You see, God is what? Love. That's all he is. So love, if God is love and God is light, that means love and light must be the same thing. And if God is spirit and love and light, that means spirit, love, and light have got to be what? The same thing. It's the same thing. They're interchangeable. 2 Corinthians 4:4 says, in whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. So now we just introduced another God here. Did we not? The God of this world. You think, well, that's the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. That's not what it says here. That's not what it says. This is one that blinds. Could a God of light blind? No. No. He tries to blind lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ. Gospel is nothing but good words. Words that spread light. His whole job is to stop us from spreading and moving the light, introducing light to people and situations, you see. And so there's a difference between the God of light and the God of darkness. But and one thing I want you to see, it's our belief system that determines our light switch. If you're taught your whole life that God hates you because of what you've done, it's hard to turn that switch on. You know? But if God's a God of forgiveness, there's another thing that he must be, right? God of forgiveness. So forgiveness, love, spirit, light, they must be all interconnected. See, God's a whole different thing than we realize. God's so big that the word God, Elohim, in these verses is all in the plural. He's too big to be one. I mean, because he inhabits eternity. God right now is at the day you were born. He's at the day Adam and Eve were. He's at the day when the creation was started. He's also at the end when the lights are going to be turned on in a whole different way. The whole thing is this one layered package to God. We have to wait. He doesn't have to wait. God's never been lonely. Did you know that? Because when he was back there with the dinosaurs back millions of years ago, and there was no human on earth, you see, he was at the same time all the way in the future after we're gathered together. God's never been lonely. It's a crazy concept. But that's how God can direct you in the way you need to go. He already knows what you need. He knows the best course of action. But the God of this world tries to blind you from that course. And that's why things get so screwed up. Is because we allow ourselves to be blinded. Because we don't remember the light. 2 Corinthians 4, 6, and 7 says, "For God who commanded the light to shine out of darkness hath shined in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us." So how does this thing that we're calling light shine? Could it be how we utilize that light that exposes our treasure? How you process light is how you're going to expose the treasure of who you are. And each of you are an incredible treasure to God, or you wouldn't be here. That's the advantage of a true human, a human that understands light, love, power, might, and spiritual things. See, light has to be learned to be shared. Um, 2 Corinthians 11, 13, and 14. For such are false prophets. This was talking to people who were going to fellowships of the day back in 57 AD. For such are the false prophets, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, don't be amazed at that, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Think about when you've been hurt the worst. Isn't it always by somebody you allowed to get close to you? Almost always. You see, people know how to put on the shine when they want something out of you, or they want you to do something for them. This is a manipulation of light. The plagiarizing of light. The bastardization of light. You see, Adam and Eve allowed manipulation when they shifted their thoughts of sufficiency from God back on themselves. That's really where they blew it. You've all heard multiple teachings on things. Bottom line, they wanted to be gods. They wanted to be their own sufficiency because they'd seen themselves walk with power. They were perfect. The devil was once perfect. The angel of light. How could something so perfect ever fall? And because the same thing right here. He wanted to be the light. He wanted to be the shining light of eternity, so to speak. It's ego, folks. We got to be careful of that stuff. It's hard to understand this, but it's simple. So, which doesn't make any sense. So 1 John 2:10 says, "He that loveth his brother abideth in the light." See how love and light are again connected? "And there is none occasion of stumbling in him." If you want to have your way clear without obstacles, then learn to walk in the light, which is walking with love, which is walking with power, which is walking with forgiveness. See, this reflects back on what's available from the first 10 truths, so to speak. It tells us that light and love are the same thing. And the last one I'm going to read in light is one I mentioned earlier, is Revelation 22:5. "And there shall be no night there, and they need no candle, neither light of the sun. For the Lord God giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever." That's us. Now imagine John, who saw this stuff. He was there. John could have even seen himself in the future. Isn't that wild? Paul was able to see things, but God told him not to tell anybody. He saw things about his future. I mean, what'll God do for you? Well, what do you need? What are you willing to receive? What are you ready to receive? What are you unafraid to receive? If we're afraid to walk with power, then will we? No. Fear will stop us in our tracks all the time. See, the light spectrum begins and ends in the spiritual. Someday we're going to live with a light that's better and brighter than the sun. And the sooner we believe that light and love from God, and that it's Him who gives us our dominion, the sooner we're going to master our problems. Learning to utilize God's spiritual light is lesson 1. That's point 1. You might think, well, how could he get all that out of that verse? Well, you could do the same thing. Number 2, God protects us globally and universally. Genesis 1:6. This is the second time where it says God said. Just look up the words God said in your concordance and you'll come up with the same things. "And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Okay? Now we're not talking about dirt or a dam. We're talking about something that's separating two different aspects of water. Remember I told you twice in teachings how scientists have recently discovered that over 50% or about 50% of the water that we drink on Earth or bathe in on Earth actually predates our Earth, our sun, and our solar system. So somehow this water came from somewhere else and from a time before this solar system. It's crazy. Look it up yourself if you don't believe me. They figured out how to chemically figure this out. So where did it come from? So there has to be water somewhere else. And isn't that what they're always looking for with these space probes? They're always looking for water because they know without water you don't have what? Life. Because water you would have to have hydrogen and if you have oxygen, so with water you have everything you need for life. Isn't that crazy? So God protects us globally and universally. See, we live in a bubble of love as big as the universe. And this whole universe is designed to support us. We're sort of in a womb of love. That's how God wants us to think of it. It's just a womb of love. This whole universe. and this little earth floating around, in that thing, going around its old sun with its little moon going around it. The whole thing, it's just, we're totally cared for. 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast all your care upon him, for he careth for you. God cares for you. He cares for you. Now imagine if a God inhabits eternity. He's everywhere present at the same time. He knows everything, and he's always good. He's light, he's love, he's forgiveness, all those good things. Isn't that who you want to take care of you? Would you call that a safe being? I was at a networking group the other day, and this one man showed up, and he'd been kicked out of another networking group I was in. And because he's a turd, this guy. And he will use you as fast as you allow him to do it. And then he wanted to sit right next to me. And he wanted to lean on me and have his arm touching me. I mean, the whole time it was awkward. And then he's always trying to get somebody to buy something from him, which we all are. That's why you go to those things. But I could tell there's no giving back. It's all for him. See, he's not a safe person. This guy has gone to prison, and I know 2 people that are about to go to prison because of his teaching on taxes. They're in the paper. And so it's but he's not a safe person. God is safe. God's a safe being. Like that tree that was safe, when you play those games when you were a kid, and that's your base. Safe, and they can't touch you. That's how God is. God's that tree, safe, and there's no poison ivy growing up the back side of it. See, lesson 2 is to remember that the Creator, and only the one Creator, is our protector and caregiver. See, Abraham, he was the guy, he was one of the first people to really promote to the world one God. The rest of the world is what's called polytheistic. They have many gods. Still do. There's Christians who have many gods. And so he wanted to push one God. And then later on, Jethro, the guy who trained Moses for was that 40 years? He was an offspring. He was a genetic offspring of Abraham also. And we'll get to that if I decide to do that next week. So again, God's our protector and our caregiver. God takes care of us. That's the second lesson. So first one was light. Now he protects us globally and universally. You're protected like a child in a womb. That's God. That's sort of the mind picture here. There's it's just, you're just in there. God protected you. The waters from the waters. And number 3, God sets us up for success. And Genesis 1:9 says, and God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. So now we are talking about land and water. So now this bunch of water, now you got a chunk of land that's together there. Terra firma. You're sitting on it, standing on it. See, God gave us a place to live that has everything we'll ever need. Everything has already been supplied by God. Everything. Everything, everything, everything. Every mineral you need, every cure you need, everything is here. We just have to figure out how to find the pointers to get it. And that's where that light, that spirit comes in, that spirit of God that we have. Philippians 4:19 says, but my God shall supply all your need according to his what? Riches in glory by Christ Jesus. God supplied all your need. Yeah. Somebody just said past tense. It's already happened. Do you believe that every single one of your needs has been supplied? Yes, we do believe that. And, Lesson 3 is that God has already set us up for success. It's already done. Everything we'll ever need is already here. The right words, the right people, the right everything. Everything is here. We just have to get we have to get away from whatever's blinding us from finding our prize or from unleashing our treasure, so to speak. It's the blinding that limits us. You ever notice how people from other countries act differently than we do? And they think differently than we do. They have different ethics and morals, and they think they're right. They do crazy stuff in the name of their God. You see, but it's and so do we sometimes in the name of whatever. But the point is the Bible says every way of a man is right in his own eyes. Everybody thinks they're right. So it's very hard not to get blinded if you've been raised in a culture that trains people that way. That's why we're limited at times. We've just been trained not to see. It's like I've said many times, you're driving down the street and you see a house and you go, I never noticed that before. I never saw that building before. What's up? And then you've driven past it 100 times. Why don't you do that? Because you're just used to looking the other way every time. Well, spiritually, do you think it's any different? It's the same. We're just so used to seeing things, looking at what we want to look at, that we miss what we should be looking at. So that's sort of that next one. So lesson number 3, God has already set us up for success. Now number 4, God set the earth up for success. The earth. Because without this earth, we don't really have a good place to be. There's enough movies that talk about Armageddon and we got to find a new planet somewhere to go live on and all this. Well, this one's pretty good. It's still pretty good. It's never, people are what make it more difficult. So God set the earth up. Now, verse 11 of Genesis 1. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. Now, there's no mention here that these things are for humans. Not yet. And so they have to be for the earth. For water to give life, it needs plant life in it, right? I mean, for oxygen to be in the air, you have to have plant life, but plants also need what people give. And they need what it all works together. So that's what he's telling here. He goes, I set this whole thing up. I take care of the earth. I take care of you. Here it's talking about keeping the earth functioning in an orderly fashion. You see, genus and species must remain together yet separate. Recently, below the frozen Siberian tundra, a group of Russian scientists found 30,000-year-old animal burrows about the size of a soccer ball. And in these small frozen caves that stay around 15 to 20 degrees below zero, they found these nests made of the hair of woolly mammoth and woolly rhinoceroses. And they also found within there seeds that themselves were carbon dated at 30,000 years old. And scientists were able to grow 36 seed-producing plants from those seeds. Life was still in those seeds after 30,000 years. That's what this is talking about. This whole thing is set up to rock and roll, this earth, this planet. And the whole design of it is so that we can flourish. Everything we will ever need is here. Everything those seeds needed was there if they could just get into the light and get the right nutrients that they needed. So point 4, if the earth is that the earth is totally set up for long-term success. So are we. And now number 5, God gave us physical light, time, miracles, and hope. And you'll see why I say all these things. He gave us, I'll say it again. He gave us physical light, time, miracles, and hope. And this is a lot of stuff in these simple verses, but it's there. Verse 14, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And the next verse talks about lights for the day and the night. See, this is a massive study, but simply put, these physical lights in the sky, we call them stars or planets, you see, they help us keep track of the passage of time. And they also help us discover the miraculous, where that word signs means miraculous. So what information could a star give us that's miraculous? And see, the story laid out in the stars will give us hope. Just like John the Apostle could see into the future, God showed him things. We can peer into our future by understanding the Word of God. But before there was a written word, it was also, the story was written by stories that surrounded constellations. They said this one means this and this one means that. And it was all the story of the Christ and then us, the great victory that's going to happen someday. See, hope allows us to see the miracles behind the veil, to see what goes on unseen by others. Hebrews 6:12 says that hope is an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, which entereth into that within the veil. See, hope will allow you to see things that you shouldn't be able to see. That's how big hope is. Someday I want to be able to teach more on this. But hope, I'm not just talking about looking forward to things. I'm talking about the hope of the future. When the gathering and all the things that are going to happen someday, that hope, it'll open the door for us to understand things that are hidden behind the veil. That's what Hebrews is saying. Then maybe you're going to find your answer by sometimes maybe learning about the hope. It's just part of the process here. It's something we need. This is one thing that a human has to do. They have to think of now, the passage of time now, our life now, but we have to realize that it's longer than this. It's going to go on forever. Where do we fit in that whole thing? People who can't see, they have weird sleep patterns because they're in darkness all the time. They can't see the passage of time the same as people who can see do. It's different. They've done studies where people went into a cave for a few months, totally dark, and then saw how their sleep patterns will totally shift from what they were raised in. I mean, they'll sleep for they'll get into some routine, but it'll be a whole different set of hours. They may work for 16 hours and then sleep for 12. And it may be that's their pattern. Everybody will find that, but it's not the one that God set up because of day and night. It's different. Darkness can change everything, and so can light. So the saying that the point number 5 informs us that we have enough light to get things done. Each of us have enough light to get things done. And we have enough days to do the things that we're called to do. You're going to have just enough time in your life to do what you're called to do. And through hope, we are able to see the miraculous things that we need to see, the signs, that we are supposed to understand and see. So number 6, God created soul life from the water. And I haven't figured, we're going to hit a point here that I haven't quite figured out. This is sea animals and birds. And how they're connected, I haven't quite got this yet, but you'll see how number 6 and 7 are similar, but they're not the same. And they both talk about soul life. Verse 20, and God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. Now, it doesn't talk about any other animals here, does it? See, here it says fish and fowls are somehow connected to the water as far as soul life goes. And this is going to take some further study. And so point 6 is that the one true God, not other gods, that gave breath life to the animals and the sea creatures. And probably this is because people worship this stuff. And God knew they were going to, and he has to separate it. I mean, people worshiped people. They worshiped the Nile. They worshiped the crocodile. They worshiped certain fish. They worshiped birds. It's all this of this to separate the thoughts of different things. People, man usually thinks of land animals and sea creatures and air. So number 7 is God created soul life from the land. Now the last one said he did it from the water. Now what that really means, I don't fully understand. Here it says from the land, and it's talking about all land, prey, and predator. And so verse 24, and God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after its kind, cattle and creeping thing, and the beast of the earth after his kind, and it was so. And here it says, let the earth, that's talking about the earth, bring forth living creature. Living creature is soul life. So there's a difference. There's a difference. Why is it separated, not all in one point? There has to be a reason. See, this is similar to 6, except for it says the soul life came from the earth. Now, it's interesting to think that fish, they take in oxygen differently than we do, right? They just get it from their gills. Birds have air sacs in them. And when they breathe in, it fills these air sacs, and then they just pump that air back through their lungs. They don't respirate like we do, breathe in and out. They just breathe in, and then it respirates out. That's why it's sort of a supercharged breathing system. That's why they can fly at thousands of feet high for days, because they never run out of oxygen. A lot of us who've run long distance, it's hard, or even short distance. It can get hard at times. You see, so it's different. How a land animal breathes is different. And it's funny that they think the dinosaurs breathed a lot like birds. So they would have been incredibly powerful creatures with this supercharged breathing style. Just something. And point 7, like 6, is that it was the one true God, not other gods, that gave breath life to the birds and sea creatures, you see, and to these land animals. So number 8, we're counting down here. God met our need to understand and utilize spiritual power. And this is the kicker. All this stuff leads up to this point right here. The first one talked about light, which is also spirit. But here in verse 26, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowls of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. Now this is man's view for humankind. Do you feel like you have dominion over the earth? Everything. Most of us don't. But this is what God wants us to think, that everything is supplied and we deserve everything because of this one thing, because we've already learned that God is light, God is love, God is spirit. So what is the image of God? I just said it. Light, love, spirit, goodness, all that kind of good stuff. You see, that's what God is. So that's the image of God. We'll just boil it down to spirit in here. See, can you see love? But can you feel it? You know when you're loved, don't you? And you know when somebody's unsafe. You see, can you see spiritual light? No. You see, but you can see the miraculous. You can see the dominion. You can see the abundant supply of God, and you know it wasn't you. You go, man, that job just popped up. Or I got this car just fell into my lap. You ever had experiences like that where good just happens? It just, just great stuff just happens. Well, that's how it's supposed to be, because you have what? Dominion. And you have dominion because you understand how to walk in the light, how to walk with spiritual power. So point 9, so that was point 8. It's that spiritual power. Point 9 is God gave us a spiritual advantage so that we can, let me say this again. God gave us a spiritual advantage to use, to help, and to propagate. And verse 28, it says, and God blessed them. And God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So, to me, that's, of course, you think about the numerical system. Number 8 always means what in the Bible? New beginning. And the Spirit of God will give you a new beginning. 9 is the end of cycle. And this is and he says he blessed him and he told him to go out. Point 9 puts it all together. It reminds us to use our time, our physical and spiritual treasures that God gave us, and to spread that knowledge out into the world. If we don't do it, who the heck's going to do it? There's people spreading all kinds of stuff. You see, just listen to some of the songs you listen to. Actually, listen to the words. Maybe you don't want to. So, like Ephesians 4:3-6 says, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. See, there's one body, one Spirit, even as you've been called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. Sounds like we're sort of one with God. That's a pretty good partner, isn't it? I know a guy in here who has a construction business, and he has a partner that's not always so good. He's good sometimes, but he's not always good. You see? He doesn't know what's going to happen sometimes. Well, we've all had workmates like that. You didn't know if they were going to get the job done or not. God always gets the job done. So number 9 tells us that we need to use our spiritual advantage for good. Get the word out there. Get the light out there. Spread the light. Spread the love. And number 10, lastly, God designed this planet to meet every one of our physical needs so we can carry out our calling. This is almost a reiteration here. In verse 29, it says, and God said, behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat. See, finally, God once again reminds us that every one of our needs has already been cared for. Now, if you knew all your need was ever going to be met, you could go anywhere you want to go, right? You could do anything you wanted to do. You could really be the person you really dreamed of being. That's the point of this. If your needs are already taken care of, what are we waiting for? Who are we waiting for? It's all laid out for us. 2 Corinthians 3:5 says, not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything as of ourselves, but our sufficiency as of God. So the New Testament says the same thing these other verses say. 2 Corinthians 9:7, every man According as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. Give what you have. I don't mean give everything that you have. That's not the point. Give of your gift. Give of that treasure. Give of your love, your light. That's what people want. That's what I want. Genesis 1:31. Well, first off, all our physical, emotional, and spiritual needs have already been supplied by what is already here on the earth. And I'm sure God can go grab something else from somewhere else if you need it. Who can stop him? Yeah. Good point. One man just said us. We're the ones who put the limits on God because we limit ourselves by blindness. Really comes back down to the enemy. You see, what do we allow? See, there's nothing in here about being religious, is there? Because God never wanted people to be religious. People get religious because that's the only way they can control their own minds or their own families or their own congregation. But true freedom, true truth is totally free. Free roaming, free ranging. You can go anywhere, do anything, and God will take care of you. I don't mean anything. Doing good I'm talking about. In verse 31 it says, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And then he ends that whole thought process now. So everything he did, he goes, it's good. It's good. This is all a human needs. And now, a couple of chapters after that, you see how Adam and Eve, they gave that all up, to make themselves their own sufficiency, to make themselves gods, so to speak. And they blew it. You see, those 10 sayings are the basis for a healthy spiritual life. And next week we may get into how each of these plagues are in direct opposition to these first 10 statements that any human ever heard. Oh, in 2 weeks, not next week. Yeah. See, the enemy, the adversary, the devil's main job is to keep us from the simple truth that God and only God got this whole thing started. And the entire course of the world is to get us not to remember that God has set us up for success. The whole course of the world is designed so we don't believe that God really loves us and really and truly has cared for our every need. Charles Plumb remembered that it was someone else who packed his chute, and because of that man, he lives to tell about it. The same is true with us. Who set us up for success? God and God alone designed the earth to heal and to nourish itself, as well as to heal and nourish us. Everything has been supplied in this universe. God also created soul life, or breath life, that allows us to live and to carry on life and to propagate our species, and the animals and plants theirs. You see, God created spirit, which is love, light, and power. And this spiritual connection with God gives us the ability to dominate, to have what we really need and want. So we pass on this genetically, or we don't pass this on genetically, we pass it on by words and actions. So to understand how to walk by the Spirit is as simple to operate as it is easy to get talked out of. So let's go back to the basis of all truth. Let's refocus our attention on this ultra-important first words that God designed for humans to hear and to live by. Let's once again live by the first 10 pointers to power-packed living. God bless.